I still remember the day he laughed in my face, the day my dreams died and his ego was born. That's how it all started. In the corner office of a glass tower, with the skyline burning orange behind him, my boss, Daniel Mercer, told me I wasn't leadership material. His words sliced deeper than any layoff notice ever could. At the time, I was 26, an overworked junior analyst at Mercer & Hale Consulting, one of those shiny corporate fortresses where dreams go to die under fluorescent lights. Daniel was everything I thought I wanted to be. Sharp, charismatic, dripping with success. He wore confidence like a custom suit, and everyone adored him for it. Everyone but me. Because I knew the truth. Behind the charm was a predator, a man who fed on other people's ambitions. He didn't mentor, he manipulated. He didn't lead, he controlled. And the moment I stopped playing by his rules, he decided to crush me. It happened the day I pitched an idea, my idea, a new financial analytics tool that could have revolutionized how the firm handled data. I'd worked on it for 6 months, quietly building it on nights and weekends, certain this was my shot to prove myself. When I presented it, Daniel didn't even let me finish. He smirked, looked around the conference table, and said, "Ambitious, but naive. You're not cut out for this level of thinking, Alex. Leave the big ideas to the grown-ups." The room went silent. My coworkers stared down at their laptops, pretending not to hear. And I stood there, humiliated, furious, and powerless. By the end of that week, he reassigned me to grunt work. By the end of the month, I quit. Daniel probably forgot about me the moment I walked out. But I didn't forget about him. I spent the next 4 years rebuilding myself from the ground up. I freelanced, took night classes in business analytics, and eventually launched my own startup, Insight IQ. What began in my apartment with 1 laptop and a dream grew faster than I could have imagined. Investors lined up. Clients raved. The same kind of firm that once mocked me now tried to imitate my tech. And then, last week, I got an email. "Hi Alex, it's Daniel Mercer. I heard about Insight IQ, impressive stuff. I'd love to discuss potential collaboration." The irony hit me like champagne bubbles in reverse. I agreed to meet him. Now, sitting across from Daniel in a sleek downtown cafe, I can't help but notice the fine lines etched around his eyes. He's still charming. Too charming. But there's something else in his smile this time. Desperation. And for the first time since that day in his office, I feel something unsettling crawl up my spine. Why does it feel like he's the one with a plan now? When I walked into that cafe to meet Daniel Mercer again, I thought I was in control. I had the power now, the money, the reputation, the leverage. But within the first 10 minutes, something felt off. "Alex," he said, leaning forward with that old, confident smile. "I've been keeping an eye on you. You've really built something special." The way he said keeping an eye made my stomach twist. It wasn't admiration, it was ownership, like he still saw me as one of his employees. He started talking about his company, Mercer & Hale, how things had changed since I left. "Tough market," he said. "Margins are tight, clients are pulling back." His tone was casual, but I noticed the tremor in his voice when the waiter brought the check and he hesitated, just for a second, before I reached for it. A man like Daniel never hesitated about money. That was the first red flag. The second came a few days later, when he invited me to his office, the same one where he'd once humiliated me. Only now, it looked smaller, duller, like the glow of success had faded from the furniture itself. "Let's talk partnership," he said, sliding a glossy folder across the desk. Inside were projections, investor decks, financial statements, all polished, but something didn't add up. The numbers looked too clean. The revenue growth he claimed didn't match the market data I'd seen. When I asked a few simple questions, Daniel waved his hand. "Alex, come on. You know how these reports work, everyone rounds up a little. You're an investor now, not an accountant." That word, investor, felt like bait. Over the next week, he started calling me late at night, always from different numbers. He'd talk about potential clients, but his voice would drop when I asked for names. Sometimes, I'd hear muffled voices in the background, arguing. Other times, the line would just cut out mid-sentence. I told myself it was stress, bad timing, coincidence. But every red flag I ignored came with a weight, a tightening in my chest that reminded me of that day years ago when he'd laughed at my dream. And then came the worst part. My assistant forwarded me an internal report. Mercer and Hale had been quietly bleeding contracts for months. Half their big clients had already jumped ship. Yet Daniel kept insisting everything was under control. When I confronted him, he just smiled that same smooth smile and said, "Alex, you're too emotional about this. That's what held you back before." That line hit like a slap. For a moment, the air between us felt just like it had years ago. Me, small and doubting myself, and him, standing above it all. But this time, I caught the shift in his eyes. The charm flickered. There was fear there. And something else. Something he didn't want me to see. And I started to wonder, what if Daniel didn't just need my money? What if he needed me to save him? It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that looks ordinary until it ruins everything. I was reviewing Mercer and Hale's quarterly audit when I noticed something strange. One of the projects Daniel had shown me during our partnership talks, the Atlas contract, didn't exist in any public database. No registration, no client history, no billing records. But the financials claimed it had generated over $2 million in revenue. I double-checked with my analyst team. They came back an hour later with a single sentence. "The Atlas contract is fake." My blood ran cold. I opened the files Daniel had sent me. Contracts, emails, even digital signatures. They looked legitimate at first glance, but when I zoomed in on one of the PDF timestamps, I saw it. The signature date was months after the supposed deal had closed. He'd forged the documents. Daniel Mercer, the man who told me I wasn't smart enough for the business world, was running a shell operation, and I was about to become the investor that kept his crumbling empire alive. When the truth hit, I couldn't breathe. Every late-night call, every evasive answer, it all made sense. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a lifeline. And he chose me because he knew I'd never suspect him again. Because he'd already broken me once. I stormed into his office that afternoon. His assistant barely had time to stand before I threw the folder onto his desk. "Atlas contract," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell me why it doesn't exist." He didn't even flinch. Just leaned back, adjusted his cufflinks, and smiled that snake oil smile. "You always were thorough, Alex. I should have remembered that." "So it's true." I snapped. He shrugged. "Business isn't about truth. It's about perception. And perception says Mercer and Hale is thriving, as long as no one looks too closely." The casualness of it made me sick. "You tried to scam me," I said, my voice low. "You wanted my money to cover your lies." "No," he said, standing. "I wanted your name. Insight IQ has credibility. You could have saved us both." He said it like we were partners in crime. I wanted to hit him. To scream. To remind him that he was the reason I'd left everything behind, that he'd already taken my pride once, and now he'd tried to steal my success, too. Instead, I just stared at him, every muscle in my body trembling. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I whispered. He smiled again. "Yeah. I picked the wrong investor." That line burned into me. I walked out before I could say anything I'd regret, or something I wouldn't. But as I rode the elevator down, I made myself a silent promise. This wasn't over. He thought he could bury me again. But this time I had the power, and the proof. And I was going to make sure Daniel Mercer learned what real failure felt like. For 2 days, I couldn't think straight. Anger, disbelief, humiliation, they tangled inside me until I couldn't tell one from the other. Daniel's words haunted me. I picked the wrong investor. It wasn't just arrogance, it was dismissal, the same tone he'd used years ago when he told me I wasn't leadership material. He still thought I was beneath him. That I'd walk away quietly, like before. Maybe that's what broke something in me. Or fixed it. On the third night, I found myself back in the same apartment where Insight IQ had been born. My old desk, the one covered in coffee stains and code scribbles, sat in the corner like a memory waiting to be revived. I sat down and opened my laptop, pulling up every file, every message, every forged document Daniel had ever sent. For the first time since this mess began, I wasn't angry. I was focused. I spent the next 12 hours digging. I traced email headers, cross-checked timestamps, compared transaction IDs. The deeper I went, the uglier it got. Mercer and Hale wasn't just struggling, it was collapsing. Daniel had been falsifying reports for over a year, shifting funds between dummy accounts to mask the losses. The Atlas contract wasn't an isolated lie. It was the centerpiece of a web of fraud. By dawn, my laptop was filled with evidence. And my fear had turned into fire. That morning, as sunlight hit the skyline, I finally understood something I'd missed all those years ago. Daniel had never been powerful. He'd just been loud. His authority came from intimidation, not intelligence. And I had spent years mistaking his cruelty for strength. He told me I'd never succeed because he needed me to believe it. Because if I did, he'd always be in control. Not anymore. When I walked into Insight IQ headquarters that morning, my team noticed the change. I wasn't the quiet, overworked founder they were used to. I was decisive, cold, determined. Pull everything we can on Mercer and Hale, I said. Public records, client complaints, vendor payments, everything. My lead analyst hesitated. Are we taking legal action? I smiled. Not yet. Because I wasn't just going to expose Daniel. I was going to let him walk himself straight into the trap, thinking he still had the upper hand. Later that evening, I drafted an email. Daniel. You're right. I overreacted. Let's talk about next steps. I think I might still be interested in a deal. Alex. I stared at the screen before hitting send, my reflection faint in the laptop's glow. For the first time, I didn't see the junior analyst he'd humiliated. I saw the man who would destroy him, with the same calm precision he once used to destroy me. I knew this had to be surgical, not petty. If I wanted Daniel gone, it would be because the world saw the truth, not because I'd screamed it at him in a cafe. So I made a list, cold and precise, and began to check off every piece. I exported every forged contract, every mismatched timestamp, every suspicious ledger entry into one encrypted folder. I had Insight IQ's analysts rerun the audits with fresh eyes and different software. We pulled bank statements, traced transaction flows, and mapped the shell companies Daniel used like veins on a corpse. The pattern was ugly and undeniable. Money siphoned, invoices manufactured, vendors that only existed on paper. I printed the key pages and put them in a safe deposit box under a fake name. If anything happened to me, the proof would still exist. Paper proves things, but people tell the story. I reached out quietly, former clients who'd been ghosted, a disgruntled ex-accountant who owed Daniel more resentment than loyalty, and one vendor who'd been paid in bounced checks. I met them separately, off the record, recorded conversations where legally possible, and had them sign affidavits. Each testimony fit like a puzzle piece, showing motive and method, not just anomalies. Daniel still thought he could manipulate perception. I let him. I played the investor role he wanted. Warm, nostalgic, insinuating trust. I accepted coffee meetings, returned his charm, even praised his acumen in public. Meanwhile, I set a lure, a faux bridge investment email drafted to look like a lifeline offer. My legal counsel prepared a conditional wire transfer that would only clear after compliance checks. A check we controlled. If Daniel tried to move funds or alter records, the digital fingerprints would scream. Fraud isn't a rumor, it's a criminal matter. I connected with a regulator contact I'd met at a conference and shared a redacted dossier. I didn't file immediately. I wanted to time it so the regulators and the press would hit concurrently. When the hammer fell, there would be no room for spin. Reputation is the oxygen of people like Daniel. I quietly briefed a journalist who'd covered corporate scandals, not with raw files, but with a narrative and the promise of incontrovertible proof on a specific date. The plan was to synchronize, release the regulator's investigative notice, then the press piece, then the detailed evidence packet, all within hours. Throughout, Daniel smiled. He called me my savior, and sent late-night messages about saving the legacy. He bragged about potential buyouts and told mutual contacts we were reconciling. To everyone else, he still looked untouchable. But every move he made fed the net I'd woven. He transferred funds to a consultant, who matched the shell company names we'd traced. He updated one forged contract to change a date. He left a voicemail at 2:14 a.m. saying, "You don't understand how deep this goes." It was the clue I needed. The date was set. I had the regulators on standby, the journalist waiting, witnesses ready to testify, and the conditional wire that would reveal his next manipulation as it happened. He thought he was winning. He thought I'd be the investor who bailed him out. In 3 days, the world would watch him fall, and I would be there, watching him realize how badly he'd miscalculated. The morning the world turned, the city felt thinner, like the air was holding its breath. I walked into the regulator's office with a slim binder and a quiet pulse. Outside, cameras clustered like hungry birds. Inside, lawyers moved with the cold efficiency of predators. At 10 a.m., the press embargo lifted. At 10:01 a.m., an investigator's letter hit Mercer and Hale's inbox. An inquiry into suspected financial fraud and falsified contracts. At 10:03 a.m., my journalist's headline made the front page. Top consulting firm accused of multi-million-dollar fraud. Daniel watched it happen on 3 screens at once. He didn't scream. For a terrifying second, his face didn't move, his carefully rehearsed charisma gone slack. Then he called. I let it ring. It started small: subpoenas, frozen accounts, auditors in expensive suits arriving at Mercer and Hale like a judicial ice storm. His board convened emergency meetings. Clients issued terse statements. The Atlas contract, his golden lie, was dissected in public. Timestamps highlighted, forged signatures magnified, fake vendors exposed by our tracing. The conditional wire I'd set up? It never cleared. Instead, it served as a live bait. When his CFO attempted to reroute funds in a panic, the transfer trail lit up, and regulators had digital receipts in hand. The courtroom, when it came, felt unreal, like a set built of cold oak and fluorescent lies. Reporters filled the gallery. Daniel arrived in a suit that suddenly looked tired, his smile a brittle thing. Prosecutors laid out the ledger page by page. Shell companies, falsified invoices, a desperate pattern of siphoning to paper accounts. Then we played the recordings, the late-night calls, the clipped instructions, his shaken voice in the voicemail. "You don't understand how deep this goes." His signature on the Atlas contract was broken down. A handwriting expert explained how the slant, pressure, and timing matched his hand. The real blow came when a vendor took the stand and produced one of Daniel's own emails. An email he'd sent me in confidence but I'd copied for safekeeping. The same email where he admitted, almost offhand, to creating perception until we stabilize. The courtroom murmured. Daniel's confident mask fractured. He tried to turn it into a spectacle, blaming market pressures, blaming the rogue accountant, even trying to point at me with the old cruel line, "You're emotional." But the jury had the evidence. The board had the frozen balance sheet. The clients had the invoices. The judge read the indictment aloud with a voice that felt like an executioner reading a verdict before the trial even began. When the gavel finally came down, it didn't sound like triumph. It sounded like a long, final exhale. Daniel was escorted out in cuffs. His phone was snatched. His legal team collapsed into whispered strategy. Cameras flooded him with flashbulbs that painted his face in staccato humiliation. Reporters shouted questions he couldn't answer. For the first time since that glass office where he'd laughed at me, he looked small. I stood on the courthouse steps as the crowd thinned. People I'd never met clapped me on the back. Colleagues I'd outgrown offered teary congratulations. A journalist asked for a quote. I declined. Words felt cheap next to the quiet ledger of what had been stolen and reclaimed. And yet, under the satisfaction, there was a hollow I hadn't expected. Sitting in the passenger seat of my car that evening, replaying the trial in my head, I realized something ugly. The fall had been public, but who else had been pulling strings? Who else had profited? The documents stopped at Daniel's front door, but paper is a terrible mirror of motive. I had won. The man who once declared my limits was exposed, humiliated, and unmade. But as the city lights shimmered against the windshield, I realized revenge had a cost I hadn't fully counted, and that the story wasn't entirely over. 6 months later, I walked past Mercer and Hale's old building, now stripped of its nameplate, windows dark, and lobby half torn apart. The empire that once glowed with Daniel Mercer's ambition was nothing but an echo chamber filled with dust and silence. He was gone, sentenced to 4 years for fraud and embezzlement, banned from holding any executive position again. The newspapers called it the fall of a visionary. I called it karma with a court order. His company was auctioned off piece by piece. Ironically, one of my investors bought a portion of it, the data division I'd helped build all those years ago. Now it sat under my portfolio, managed by my team. Mercer and Hale had become a subsidiary of Insight IQ. Poetic, isn't it? But the real victory wasn't financial. It was waking up each morning knowing I didn't flinch at his name anymore. That I didn't owe him my rage or my fear. The man who once told me I'd never succeed had become a headline I barely finished reading. Still, some nights I think back to that day in his office. The smirk, the dismissive laugh, the words that started everything. You're not cut out for leadership, Alex. Maybe he was right back then. I wasn't ready. But he taught me the one lesson he never meant to, that failure doesn't define you. The way you rise after it does. Now, my company runs mentorship programs for young analysts, the kind of people Daniel used to crush under pressure. Every time I sign a new contract or give a talk on ethical leadership, I remember what it felt like to be dismissed, humiliated, underestimated. I carry that memory like armor. A few weeks ago, a letter arrived in my office. No return address. Just 2 words scrawled in uneven handwriting. You won. I don't know if it was from Daniel. Maybe it was, maybe not. But I placed it in my drawer and smiled. Because the truth is, I didn't win by destroying him. I won by becoming the person he said I never could be. As I stood outside that empty building one last time, the wind catching the torn Mercer and Hale banner, I whispered the words I'd waited years to say. You were wrong, Daniel. You were always wrong. And just like that, the ghost of him, and the version of me he tried to bury, finally disappeared. Movie camera, if you've ever been told you'd never make it, remember this story. Have you faced a boss, a friend, or someone who doubted you, and proved them wrong? Tell me your story in the comments. Speech balloon, let's talk about it. Because success is the sweetest revenge. And if you loved this journey, hit subscribe. More real-life revenge stories are coming soon. Because sometimes, poetic justice isn't just fate. It's earned. Briefcase fire.